Hi there, and welcome back to the Fuse Show. My name's David Tran. I'm one of the co-hosts of the show. I'm also a co-founder of Xfusion.io, and today I'm joined by Kai Pedersen. He's the CTO of AstrumU, a company whose goal is to translate educational experiences into economic opportunity. Thanks for joining us on the show, Kai.
Thank you for having me, David. Pleasure to be here.
So I've recognized you've been at a lot of different startups. What would you say is the driving force in your personality or your experiences that makes you motivated to do all these things in the first place? Because I think a lot of people see startups as a relatively higher risk type of pursuit.
You know, it's interesting. I think I do have a higher appetite for risk than most, and so when you do go into a startup, there is that anticipation of, are we going to be successful, and what are the what's the upside? And so you always look at it from the perspective of what is the upside? Do you believe in the story? And more importantly, do you want to be there to work with the people you're going to be working with? So the startup experience, however, and this is the thing that most people miss because they always sort of see the stories about, you know, those rare startups that really go to the stratosphere, but they miss the story of learning. They miss the story of the relationships that you build, the impact that you can have. You know, the fact that you're working with new technologies and in some cases changing the way things are done so that people, at the end of it, your customers have a real sort of experience that's different from whatever they've done before. And so you can see the appeal from that perspective. Of course, it does come with its risks, but at the end of the day, I think I enjoy the startup scene. I've worked for big companies. And one of the things with big companies is they are about mitigating risk. So they always look to the top line, and they always look at it from the perspective of, you know, creating that operational ability to forecast their success. And so they create a rhythm around that. The challenge with that, of course, is that it means it limits your ability to innovate, limits your ability to learn, and you sort of spend a lot of time really optimizing on the edges rather than actually doing something impactful. And interestingly enough, big companies are pretty risky in themselves. And this is what people kind of miss, is that you get paid hazard pay. There's a reason why Candyland exists, because you're going to be specialized into a particular role. And if you are unable to move out of that role, someday down the road, that role is no longer necessary for the business. And the business will continue to move on, as it always does, but not necessarily with you. So I kind of look at it from both sides of the equation. And my view is I like adventure. I like to see impact in the world and really, you know, continue to learn, particularly with the teams that I build.
Where in your career would you say that was the way you started to think that way, or would you always think that way from even before you started working?
You know, I was born in Africa. I grew up and traveled around the world. You know, my hobbies tend to be on the riskier side, the perceived risk side, so mountaineering and other activities. So I think I had a desire to be an entrepreneur. And when I started my working career in the UK, I was lucky enough to work in jobs where I was given that opportunity to learn and continually push. And I had some great managers who kind of mentored me along the way. But the UK is not a great environment for the entrepreneur. It's very hard to raise money. Risk and failure are looked down on rather than embraced. And so, this was back in the 80s, 90s, so it may have changed since then. So when I came to the US, and I ended up working in San Francisco, this was in 94, and I saw the things that were going on in Silicon Valley. And I was, you know, at some point I was thinking, well, how do I get into that opportunity? And fortunately, circumstances changed for me, where the company I was with decided that the owners decided to sell it, get out of the asset management business. And that gave me the opportunity to actually go into Silicon Valley and take on my first startup. And that was, for me, that was the journey of, you know, an eye-opening experience. Because I realized, wow, you can actually just pull people together, sell an idea, make it happen, and then ultimately figure out how to turn it into a business so that you get paid for it and, you know, get less and less reliant on raising money. So all of those things I learned here in the US. The US as an environment is well suited to it. They've figured out how to enable the entrepreneur, how to embrace failure so that you can learn from it quickly. They understand, some of the techniques that you need to use to really minimize your risk while you're getting the product out the door and ultimately building a relationship with the customers.
Can you elaborate on what you think you experienced in Silicon Valley or maybe the United States as a whole that you feel like makes it easier for teams to come together, for products to be built from the ground up, and for companies to start off?
This is the one country where, and sometimes it gets lost in the heat of the debate. This is the one country which really understands the value of innovation. I mean, its own founding, frankly, was an innovative idea based on experiences from the founding fathers. So if you look at it and you understand that it's about diversity, it's about taking advantage of the circumstances in the marketplace, but more importantly, it's rewarding upside risk. There is, in this country, an understanding that if you're going to take that risk, you should be rewarded for it. And, human beings, at the end of the day, are incentivized to do things when they see the upside potential. And some of that upside potential is not always financial, by the way. It could be, I see the impact that the service that I'm offering is going to have today, in AstrumU's case, is going to have on the learner and their ability to seek a job where they are best suited for ultimately career success and economic opportunity. And so you kind of take all of these factors into account, and you'll find that if you've got a good vision and you can bring together the right tools and the right people with a incentive scheme that's tied to the values of your organization, you will attract people in. And at the end of the day, that is just ingrained in American culture. And it goes all the way back to when the country was first founded, the risks that were taken by people who, literally came across in creaky old wooden boats and and faced completely unknown territory. Now, and took that risk because they saw the upside in it. And I think that's just part of the American way.
I can't remember what the number is the last time I checked, but I think it's something along the lines of 95-ish plus percentage of startups fail within 5-10 years. I can't remember the exact number. So
I always sort of say it's the 80-10, it's 80% of them fail. 10% kind of go on to kind of make a decent sizable business. And then, the other 10% are the ones that are the big winners. And if you look at it from that perspective, yeah, sure, it looks like a really, you're throwing yourself against a rock wall and hopefully you won't break your body up in the process. But the truth is that startups are experiments. And this is what's really important about innovation is that, yeah, your idea may be good, but is it going to take in the mind of the consumer? Mm-hmm. And the only way you can do that is by, positioning the case, looking at the market, and then going out there and experimenting with it. And so that's why you see startups going through a series of funding rounds, mm-hmm. right? As you hit the milestones for each funding round, you engage the investor's appetite, and they will then put more money in if you're demonstrating an ability to hit those goals. And so the smart startups are the ones that, they focus on the outcomes of the experiment, and they really, really get to the point of, are we hiring the right people? Are we building the right product? Are we listening to what our customers' real need is versus, dreaming up a need and saying, build it and they will come. And if you do that, you'll find that you will succeed. Now, a lot of the startups that fail, they fail for a number of reasons. It could be culture, right? It could be the fact that they're building the wrong product and they haven't listened to their customers. When they say that you hear the excuse of, well, they weren't able to raise money. Well, they weren't able to raise money because they probably didn't have the right product. And the investors are savvy enough to know, well, why would I put money in if there's no upside for me? And so, yeah, there is a lot of startups that crash and burn, but I think that's actually healthy in a strange kind of way because you still learn. You still come out of it with experiences that you can use for your next adventure or your next entrepreneurial journey. But the key is in that failure, you're using capital in a really efficient way, and you're getting the products or the services that are not necessary out of the marketplace, so that the ones that do have a value proposition that customers are engaging and buying, they will succeed. And so I think in the end, the winners always come through.
Speaking of winners, I imagine everyone who's either planning to start a company or join an early stage startup like wants to figure out what are the like elements that are more likely to predict success versus failure. You've been in the startup space for a while. Like, what have you seen? Like, what is your personal judgment on that?
So I think it's a capacity to master. I think it's this ability to continually be open to new ideas, to change and to adapt, and to really have this we call it the scrapper mindset, right? It's this idea of you'll figure a way out. It may not be apparent to you in this particular moment in time, but if you think about it and you bring the right people into the conversation, solutions tend to manifest themselves in strange and rather unique ways, and you'll take advantage of it. And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, I think the capacity to master is perhaps the most important thing. Being open to new ideas, being willing to learn new things, and being able to adapt to changes as they happen in your journey is absolutely critical for anyone who wants to get into the startup space.
So that's for the individual who wants to prepare themselves. What about how do they pick the appropriate company to start or join?
So I have what I call the 3 C's. So it's culture, capacity to master, capabilities. The most important one from an organization's perspective is when you're hiring somebody, are they a culture fit? Do they fit in with the values that you've established within your organization? Now, that's not to say that we're trying to build an environment where you have to be totally loyal and subservient to the values. I think that's a mistake, and a lot of people who try to set up their values do that. What you're really doing is you're saying, look, we have a set of values. We know that when you're outside of the company, you have values that are dear and personal to you and your family and the way you want to live. And here are the values that we want you to express and show when you join the company. Is there an alignment? And you can learn that by asking the questions. I say to the team frequently, always look at the white spaces between the narrative and the resume. What are you learning from that talk? What are they telling you? What are they not telling you? And focus in on those questions. And, if you keep the conversation open and free, similar to what we're doing here, you'll learn a lot about a person. And you'll see through their interactions, the way that they respond and the way they tell their story, that you can sort of start to string together the alignment to the values you have in a company. So getting that right is really important. Then it's the capacity to master, which we've already spoken about. And then the last one, which is, it's important, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker for hiring the person, is the capabilities they have today. And you know that, especially in software, every 2 to 3 years, the tools that you're using, the techniques that you're using are going to be different. So the skills that if you've got a real need today for a particular skill set because there's a crunch, then absolutely you're going to put some weight on that decision. But if you've got somebody who's aligned to your values, got the capacity master, and has some of the skill sets that are important to the role, you know that you can teach them the rest. So you probably end up hiring that person because you can tell through the values conversation of the capacity master that they have the right trajectory to close out that gap.
As a correlated to the last question, are there predictors of near certain failure based on what you've seen? If someone, let's say you have a friend and they're looking to join, they know they want to join a startup, but in terms of choosing which startup to join, are there certain things they should be wary of in like either their interactions with the company or like the interview process that you feel like, are like yellow or red flags?
So, a good example is when I look at somebody's resume and they talk about the work that they did in a software project, and if I see the word "I" all the time, I get really suspicious because I'm gonna sit there and go, well, hang on, software is a team sport. You didn't do all of this. And so, of course, the questions then for me will be, well, tell me exactly what you did. How did you work with the people? And then I listen for things like when they open up and they talk about the project, are they naming the names of the person that they worked with? Are they accrediting the people in the project with the deliverables they gave versus what they did? Do they talk to me about the success in terms of business metrics? What was the impact of this work that you did? Did it drive sales? Did it drive down costs? Did it improve productivity across your services? those are the sorts of things that you can, intuitively screen into you or filter on when you're talking to somebody. And actually, when you let people know that that's what you're looking for, the stars will shine through, because they have no ego, right? They don't have any. They don't have a sense to say, I'm the one man island. I can do everything for you. Especially if you've worked in software and you know that actually it takes a combination of skills to bring the product to life, and you're looking for people who can come into that environment with that mindset.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the capacity to master. When you think about hiring, how do you think about balancing the needs of today versus the needs of tomorrow? For example, the technology could change and or the needs could change as it relates to you need more ICs or you need more managers. How do you, when you think about capacity to master from the day that you're looking to hire, what is the timeline that you think about for optimization?
Yep, that's a good question. So I try to look 3 to 5 years ahead.
Okay.
So when I scale up a team, it's interesting. We have the way that I've organized our performance management, and I call it performance management because I don't tie compensation to your performance. That's something that's separate, so that I can have every quarter a conversation with individuals that report up to me, and I expect them to do the same with their teams, about how to get the best out of somebody, coach them really, and show them where they're doing well, and hold them, hold the mirror up to where they could improve. And what we've done in AstrumU is we have this program where, we've given, and this is unusual for a startup, by the way, we've given every employee $500 a year to spend on training themselves up in skills or capabilities. And as long as it aligns with our future, they can actually, get signed off by the management. Then we have, for our leaders, the people that we see promise in, that are going to be, because as we scale, we want to try and encourage growth of our leaders within the company. We have a coaching program which involves, a couple of individuals who have who've had very successful careers in their own right. One's a two-star general, and the other one has led a product line up at Amazon. And so they've seen that startup scale. They know how to handle large groups of people, and they coach our new leaders for the future and help them understand how they can grow and develop and separate to that next level of thinking. And then the final piece is we have group training sessions in the company where we talk to people about the soft skills, the EQ, the things that the intangibles that you don't really talk about a lot, but actually make the difference in a company's success or failure. And so we try to build that, that development program. And then in the reviews, I will have my team, and I'll go through and I'll look at them against a series of competencies, skills as well as the soft skills, and then I'll level them out across 7 levels, which starts with entry level going all the way up to executive. And in there, I'll have an understanding of where the person is in their journey, and then we'll kind of build them up. That gives me a view of the capability across the organization, so I can see where the gaps exist in the organization. And then I'll say to myself, how am I going to close out that gap? Do I have somebody in the team that's close to moving into that next level, in which case we'll invest in them? Or is it, are we so far behind we may need to actually hire that person in? And so that makes our decision making a little bit more objective as we think about the future and how we plan around capabilities. Particularly, when you kind of come from 10 people, now we're at 40 people. One day we're going to be at 120, 150 people, and then beyond that, different levels of skills and capabilities acquired, especially in terms of management and leadership.
So let's say in the first 2 years of a company's life, would you still operate on a timeline of thinking about a capacity to master for 3 to 5 years, or would you shorten that?
So, and this is the thing about startups, you're constantly in both minds, right?
Okay.
So this is my 7th startup. So I will always look to, I work with a team to develop a yearly plan, and then I'll say, this is our action plan for the year. But I know that, within 6 months, it's probably going to change. And so we built some flexibility around that reality. And then we'll adapt our plan. So we review our work every quarter, and then we say, where are we at? And we have and some things are just killed because they're no longer relevant because of what we've learned in the market, and new things are added. But that's how we evolve the plan. And then we use that plan to inform the next planning session at the end of the year for the subsequent year. As our products start to get stable, so in the early stages, that first year is really important about building discipline around execution of the product, and then getting the product to a point where customers are paying for it, and then it's about improving the features on it. Then we can start to think about a strategic roadmap that goes beyond the year to 2 years. And then, when you've got 2 years, it's not hard to start thinking about 3 years. But you're thinking about those years from what do we need to get to be able to execute on the vision? And we look to our history, and we can kind of get a sense of what our rhythm is. And then we'll use that to say, okay, do we think we're going to hit the revenue goals that are going to sustain our business, or do we need to go out and reach for capital? If we need to reach for capital, what are the outcomes that we need to demonstrate to encourage investors to come in? And so that's when we start to think about the 2 to 3 years. So at the senior leadership level, you're always looking along the long timeline horizon, because cash is king. You want to make sure that your burn rate doesn't hit the hard crunch at the end of the runway. So you're always sort of saying, how's the product evolving? And you look at sort of short term, quarterly, then half yearly, yearly, and then how does that look like it's going to feed into the 2 to 3 year plan for the fundraising?
You said something earlier that struck me as unintuitive, and I wanted to pick your brain on it a little more. You're talking about how you disconnect performance and compensation. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I find that when you tie performance discussions to compensation, there's a whole lot of gamesmanship that goes on.
I see.
And so what happens is the employee knows that there's an incentive that they want to be recognized for. So you can't get to a really truthful conversation about their development because they're automatically in a defensive mode. So just take it out of the equation and just say, this is just our opportunity to learn from each other. Make it a two-way conversation. I mean, one of the things, I always take my reports out for walks rather than have meetings with them in an office, primarily because when you're standing side by side and just walking and talking, there's much more information that flows between that relaxed space and environment, and people, there's an automatic sense of trust. There's no barriers in the conversation. And you can just go and you can talk about anything initially, right? You just have a nice preamble. You've got the outside view. You can talk about the weather. For people who are more introverted, you need to give them time to really start to feel like they have the confidence and the trust to talk to you in an open, frank way. Walking is a great way to do it. And that just fed into this idea of, well, every time I have the performance conversations, I'm not getting that sense from the person on the other side. They suddenly change on you. And I realized it was like, oh, yeah, that's because I'm talking about their livelihood now. Yeah, that's a slightly different conversation. So that's the reason why I separate it out. And then when I look at compensation, I look at it actually from the basis of, here we are as a startup. What's the market rate for this role? And then I'll adjust compensation to meet. So I'll look at my team and I'll say, oh, yeah, you're below market rate. I'm just going to adjust you to the market rate. That takes the competition out of them looking for another job. If they know that they're always going to be at market rate, then it's about the work or it's about the leadership. So that's an easier conversation to have and fix versus constantly trying to compete with the competitive landscape because you refuse to make an adjustment unless you hire a new person in. And that doesn't actually lead to building strong, productive, trusted teams.
Have you always operated this way, or is it more of a per company basis?
I have over time evolved to this place. So in my early startups, probably not. I was learning a lot, made a lot of mistakes, definitely made a lot of mistakes, and learned from those mistakes. In terms of the journey, as I've got older and a little wiser, I realized that startups are successful because of the people and ultimately how you treat those people and what you try to do. And you try to be fair and you try to be honest and you try to be objective. And it's a hard thing to do. And so the way you overcome some of those challenges is you build a framework, and then you use your experience and judgment to bring life to that framework in a way that people can see it. You're transparent about it, and there's no surprises in terms of the message when it's delivered.
I see. Well, can you walk us through some of those lessons you learned? I think a lot of people would appreciate learning from people who are ahead of them in the startup game.
Well, one of my favorite stories, I remember when I was at Quote.com, we had a billing system that was basically tied to stored procedures in our database, our Microsoft SQL database. And every stored procedure was essentially an individualized piece of code for the way we dealt with customers. So you can imagine over a number of years, it just became a monster. And every time we wanted to try and launch a new package or a new product, we ended up, frankly, it became a nightmare. And you'd build stored procedures on stored procedures. And so essentially you build this spaghetti system that nobody could understand or actually rationalize with. So I stepped up and said to sold it to the leadership that we needed to basically replace the billing system and go with a new one. And we made a decision to go with, at that time, it was a company called Portal, to actually replace. So rather than try to fix it, it was build and replace. And the mistake I made, frankly, is I thought by going with the build and using Portal straight away, we could get there much more quickly than trying to divine through the spaghetti that we had in the system. Unfortunately, there was so much legacy tied to legal agreements that we had to address it. And it just added more complexity to Portal. And eventually what ended up happening is we created this long death march for the project team. And unfortunately, when we launched, it was just not performing where it needed to perform. And so I remember sitting in the room explaining to the CEO and the leaders with my team why it wasn't working and what we needed to do to add additional investment to get to the next step. And everyone was down. They were burnt out. They were feeling the pain. It clearly was that kind of Napoleonic death march back from Russia. And I just remember saying to the team, I appreciate the work you've done. We're not done. We're going to figure out how to move forward on this, and then had them leave the room. And I looked at the CEO, and he just, I said, so what are your thoughts? And he was rather crude about it, but I won't say it because we're on air. But essentially, he let me know where I stood. And the thing that I learned about that was I looked at him, I said, yep, no, you're right. I own it, and I am going to own it. But that's not solving the problem, Chris, and you still have a problem. And he was really, he was actually quite good about it because he sat down and he kind of, he realized that. And so we did make the additional investment, and we actually revamped the team a little bit as well, because there were some areas that we needed additional capability to be brought in. And after that, we actually solved the problem, and then we could start to launch new subscription services and packages very quickly once we got rid of it. But there was a stumble. There was a big stumble, and when you have a stumble, you've got to learn from it and you've got to own it. And those are the two things I always say to people: learn from it, own it. And because the thing about Silicon Valley, and we kind of touched on this subject earlier, Silicon Valley does recognize that there's going to be failure. When you take risks and you're working in new spaces with huge amounts of ambiguity, there is going to be failure. And it's your ability to own it and respond to it that makes the difference. And I think successful teams get that, and then they will learn very fast and execute on it.
When you think about innovation within companies, if you go too far on the innovative side, like adoption is next to impossible. I think one of those examples is probably like some people were trying, or like I think when I was at Uber, there was a team dedicated to flying vehicles. Probably too innovative for the time, but at the same time, if you like not innovative enough, I think the first example that comes to mind is like the recent Apple announcement of like their iPhone 13 is not that different from the iPhone 12. Like how do you know what the right balance is, or how do you choose the balance when you have the opportunity to make that decision?
So I try to see where the market's at. I had so this company I'm in today. It's interesting. I tried to do something similar over 20 years ago, except we used it was called Urbana Software, and we came together because we realized that standardized tests are structured in such a way that the distractors tell you something about your mastery of the content that you're being questioned on. And so we actually came up with an engine that enabled us. We called it the test as your personal tutor, because we could do the distractor analysis. We owned the patent on that, and we were able to determine that here is the recommendations of the areas you need to study so that you can pass your SAT. And we teamed up with a guy called Gary Gruber, who wrote all the test wiseness books, and so we added some test wiseness into that. And the idea was that if we capture all these tests, we can actually turn that into a competency skills framework because we have all the data from all the test takers. And we were actually having some very positive conversations at the time with people like Princeton Review. College Board was actually doing a proof of concept with us, and there's a whole bunch of exciting things that were pumping along. And what happened was when these big companies realized how we would essentially jeopardize their publishing business, they kind of walked away from us, and the market just went dead. It was like blew up completely. So I was way too far ahead in terms of where the market need was, and I hadn't really done the competitive analysis to understand the landscape or the desire for change, just because of all of these existing relationships and revenue sources that these companies had. Go 20 years later, and right now, higher education is in crisis. Test taking is now discredited to a large degree. And, suddenly people are saying, well, hang on, what's the return on my education? How can I actually take the experiences that I have through this education that I've taken through my institution and translate that into a job that's fulfilling and is going to reward me? And the institutions have done a pretty poor job of staying current with the way the marketplace is going. So when Adam, who's the founder of the company, approached me about this idea, I think it was over 3 years ago, I looked at him, I said, this is the time. And by the way, here's my old business plan. And we stayed in touch. So when the opportunity came to join him, it was a no-brainer for me, because we realized that particularly with the pandemic hitting, actually it's accelerated. So if you look at 2010, you could see already the decline in the institutions in terms of students and the enrollments. The pandemic has accelerated it now because students are saying, well, hang on, I've been working at home, you're teaching me. Why do I need to go to your institution? Why do I need to go to pay all these fees for the campus? I mean, there's a whole series of questions that are coming in. And when I've paid for it, you don't guarantee me a job. And then on the other side of the equation, you've got all the businesses saying, we can't find workers, and we've got 10 million roles that are unfulfilled. I can tell you that within that universe of people that are out there today who don't know how to map their way to success, they exist. They just need some help and guidance to get there. So I think that's how you kind of look at market timing. There's a bit of luck, and there's a bit of intuition, and then there's also do your homework and really make sure that you can see where the revenues are and what your competing interests are going to be. Now, Apple is such a behemoth. It's so big. For them, and again, this goes back to the Candyland experience, right? For them to make an innovative change, they have to do it knowing that they've got to keep the legacy with them, and they've got to do it over time, and they've got to keep the customer base with them. If they do something too radical, people aren't going to pick up the phone. They want some familiarity whilst still getting the benefit of the innovation. The radical move came when Apple was against the fence. It was in trouble. Steve Jobs came in. He realized that he had an idea and it needed to be bold and ambitious. And then, in terms of the succession planning, going over to Steve Cook, I think that was smart because he's an operational guy and he knows how to kind of drive the innovation in a way that supports and mitigates the risk of the revenue for Apple today. So it's a slightly different innovation because of the size of the market and what they actually own. Now, they have to be careful because disruptors will come in. And if they're not aware of the disruptors and they don't see them coming in and they're unable to capture that, then people will leave. People are pretty ruthless in that way. And it's the same with Google. Google, at the time, I was in Lycos. Lycos was the number one search engine at the time. Google was this little outfit right across the road from where my office was, actually. Small little outfit working on a technology that was completely interesting because they were just capturing the data on the quiet and they were indexing it. So they actually captured the long tail. And because they were the first mover in that space, they had years on which to build on that. And so that's why they're now so dominant. And it's going to be possible for others to catch up with that kind of indexing because Google's already got a head start on them. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be a disruptor. If a new technology comes on that's able to do the indexing more efficiently and whatever it could be, or there's a different way that people want to use search, then yeah, Google can be threatened. But today, I think everyone kind of knows if I'm really looking for that long tail item, I'm going to go to Google.
Right. And while we're on the topic of AstrumU, how do you build a product that meets the innovative goals that you have in mind and work backwards to develop the appropriate? How do you choose what features are worth priority on the roadmap? That's listening to the customers. In the 2.5 years that I've been here, I think we've stood up a product and pulled it back down again, maybe 5 or 6 times. And each time we've learned something. So we've gone in with a premise and we've looked at it and said, oh, this looks like a really good idea because this customer's told us it. And then so we've gone and built to that. Like you do, you kind of figure it out. And very quickly we realized, oh, no, they're not buying this beyond this one customer. So what is it that this customer has got that's valuable? And so what we've done is over a series of iterations, we have a brilliant designer on our team who kind of thinks about it from the customer's experience. How do we iterate so that we are actually capturing the customer experience? And then is there a market need for it? And so we go out and we would look at what the customers are telling us. We'll factor that back in. We'll sit in and we'll try to design an experience that engages them. And we'll test it. And then we will, take those lessons and add them into the feature set and then continue to do that. And in fact, our current product, Ready Set, which is an enrollment marketing toolkit, enables us to actually, that's come through a series of iterations. And we actually built that product for a customer last year I think we prototyped it in August. We had it launched in January this year, and now we have some 20 customers using it. And it was because of that learning and that ability to iterate and hear what they were saying and then simplifying it so that we could actually deploy it quickly. That has enabled us to, I think, remain responsive to the market. And I've always said this to the team. Our ability to succeed is through our execution. The faster we can execute, the faster we can get ahead of the ideas and do it in a design-driven way, we will be successful. Because in terms of the competitive landscape, most of our competitors cannot move that fast. We have the advantage, and as a startup, we'll take that advantage to its full hill. If you were to break down your time as a CTO, and I recognize CTOs from one company to another might be completely different, but based on your experience at AstrumU, what percentage of your time is spent talking to customers versus like technical architecture versus coaching your team leaders,
That's a good
hiring,
question.
et cetera? Yeah.
Recently, I've been doing, it's probably 25 to 30% with customers or customer-related work. I would say working on, it's interesting as a CTO, you end up wearing multiple hats. So there's marketing, there's fundraising, there's all sorts of things. So I would say maybe another 30% of that related to kind of business activities that are not strictly tied to the CTO role. And then so if I say it's like 30-30. So, and then I would say maybe 20% is really focusing on looking at the architecture and the strategic intent of it, because we have an idea now, so it's really about tweaking, improving on it. And then the rest is developing the team, focusing on the team, trying to make sure I hear what they're saying. What are the roadblocks? Help them understand how to prioritize the work so we stay on the critical path. Things like that is where I will spend the remainder of my time.
Sounds good. And the last question I'd like to ask you is, what's something you've learned in the recent years that you wish you learned a long time ago?
Ooh. That's a good question. I think for me, I think it's amazing what you learn from the people around you. When you start out on your journey, you don't realize because you're trying to make your way in the world, and you're trying to build your own reputation. So there's those years where you're trying to do that, and then you've made your reputation, and now it's about building your career and your profile. I'm at a stage now where it's actually what's the impact I want to have left behind of the people that have been with me. And now I spend a lot more time thinking about, am I teaching these individuals the right skills? If they leave, because nobody's forever, and I'm just, I kind of acknowledge that. If they leave, will they go with these principles, and will they have the same impact, and will they actually make a difference that improves the profession and improves the work and the trust and the reliability of software? And that's kind of it's a bold thing to say, but I think when you get to the stage in my journey, the truth is that it really is about the team around you, and it's about investing in them and ultimately enabling them to have their own journeys and their own successes, but retaining those values that are going to be important for them for the rest of their careers. And if I can leave a company knowing that that will continue, or it will continue in other locations, then I think that's a great way to kind of put a capstone on the journey.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for your insights, and thanks for your time, Kai. I've enjoyed this conversation. I just want to give you an opportunity for anyone who's just watching this episode, for them, if they would like to follow you or your company's journey, what's the best way for them to do so?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open about posting the aspects of our work from AstrumU, and I'm an early LinkedIn guy, so you can find me at Kai Pedersen. There's no numbers or anything.
Lucky one.
Yeah, just feel free to follow me there, and if you've got questions or stuff, just ping me and I'll follow up. It might not get you straight away, but I tend to follow up with everyone if there's a desire to learn and grow.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, David.